Welcome back to my channel for another video, and this is a very special video because I'm going to show how to marry analog photography with digital photography. I'm going to shoot my Hasselblad digital back on the Hasselblad 503CW, and I'm also going to show, of course, images coming out of that combination. Let's kick off the video. It has become quite popular to actually shoot digital backs on analog cameras, and in particular the 500 series from Hasselblad is one of these analog cameras you see being used a lot and being married to the digital world with a 50 megapixel sensor like we have it here in the Hasselblad CFV II 50c. Now this beauty here in front of me on the table has three components. There is a film back which we are going to replace by digital back here from Hasselblad. There is a camera body, and I come to that in a moment, and there is a lens. The lens I'm going to use for my analog goes digital experiment is from Carl Zeiss, and it's the Distagon 40mm widest open f4. It's a very common lens on the Hasselblad 500 series, and this lens also comes and can be purchased in the secondary market in different versions. This combination of a lens, a camera body and a film back has absolutely no electronic parts built in. This is pure analog photography. It's all mechanical parts. And this is in contrast to some other Hasselblad cameras of the same type. So this, for instance, is the 202FA, and this is a camera which actually has electronics built in. And you can easily see this here. There is a battery compartment, if you look at that, and that battery compartment contains a battery, and that camera has light metering. It also has different exposure modes here. So you have aperture priority, for instance, or fully manual mode. And it also has, even here in the Waist-Level Finder context, a display built in which can even be illuminated at night in red color. So if you are in low light, you can still see whether your light metering is working or not. In this video here, I will not work with Hasselblad cameras with electronics built in. The only electronic component I will use is that digital back CFV II 50c. I really want to marry a completely analog setup with a digital back and show the shooting experience, how it is to shoot that combination, and also the impressions from the images coming out of that, which I think are very, very special. On this particular analog classical 500 series Hasselblad camera, there would be so many things to say and explain, but I don't want to make that video overly long. I will show in the course of the video all kinds of details and also how to set this up for your digital back, but I will not cover all different aspects of these type of cameras in this video here. Maybe I come back with a later video and will also show how it is shooting this camera here with electronic components built in. But there are a few things I clearly want to show and explain. So first of all, you cannot remove on that camera the lens without the lens being cocked. And by being cocked, I mean you have to cock it here and wind it. And these lenses here have a leaf shutter, so a central shutter, and when the lens is cocked, you can remove it. So let's try to do this here. Now you can remove it. You get a glimpse into the camera body with the mirror here, of course. Let's see if I can show this. And then you have the lens here. It's a very heavy lens. It's a nice lens, and the image quality, as you will see later, coming out of that lens in combination with the digital back from Hasselblad is just not from this world. In the same way as the lens is locked and cannot be unmounted if you have not wound the camera and cocked the lens, in the same way you can also not remove the film back here if the dark slide is not protecting the film. And the way to get this done is we open it here, we take it out, we slot it in here, and now we can remove the film back. It's very simple like that, and you see here the dark slide has its place. Clearly, if you shoot then and the film is loaded, you get this back into its place here, and then the film will be exposed to light and you can take your images. There are various film backs you can mount on these type of cameras. This is here the A16-645, but you see the design actually of the opening here in the camera body is a 6x6 120mm film, and that is quite large and clearly is medium format. The film roll itself is something I don't want to cover here, but it sits here in the film back. If you unlock it, you open it, and then can get your film installed, and then you mount this back here, and then you're good to go. Don't forget, if you mounted the film, to get your dark slide in front of the back in order to protect the film from being exposed to light before the camera body is actually mounted and married to the film back. Quite easy, but some things to remember and take into account. Having said that there are some things to remember and take into account, the mechanical engineering of these cameras is nevertheless super sophisticated and reminds you in certain workflow elements you need to pay attention to. So for instance, if I want to mount this now, here my dark slide is still in the back stored as if I would be ready to shoot. If I want to mount this here, it's actually not working. I cannot firmly mount it to the camera body, and I have first, when I have my film installed, get this back into the front side here to protect the film, and then it can be mounted back to the camera body. So there are a lot of things where these camera bodies, by its mechanical engineering, help you what you need to remember. In the same context, you cannot shoot the camera if the dark frame is on top of the film and the film cannot be exposed to light. So if I wind this here and want to shoot it, the shutter release here is locked, and not before I removed the dark slide I can actually take the shot. So let's get this in the back, and now I can release the shot. Have a look. Quite nice. So a lot of things built into the highly sophisticated mechanical elements of that camera lens film back combination, which help you to not forget most important elements of your workflow. The last remark in that context, when I said before that the lens cannot be unmounted before the lens is cocked, there is a very important relation between the camera body and the lens, and they always have to be in sync. So if I have wound the camera body here, then the lens is automatically cocked and I can remove it. But if I would get this sync breaking down and I would have a removed lens which is not cocked but the camera body is actually ready to shoot, then I run into a problem and I could potentially damage the mechanics of the camera. And that's why there is some mechanics built into the lens, which I want to quickly show. Let's unmount this here. And that's actually here. And you can manually cock an uncocked lens if you have a camera body which is ready to shoot. And that is something I don't want to explore in detail, but you know, the ones who work with these Hasselblad camera bodies, they know exactly what I'm talking about. On this Carl Zeiss Distagon lens, 40mm widest open f4, we find a lot of interesting elements which are worthwhile to spend a moment. First of all, here's the distance scale. So let's just quickly focus at infinity, and focusing with these type of lenses is just a pleasure. It's so smooth, it works so well. These lenses are built so well from a mechanical perspective, and also the travel way is quite long because you saw me rotating that focus ring now for quite a while. And you see here 19 feet is kind of end of story. That's the closest focusing distance, give or take 0.5 meter. So the main distance scale for focusing and the focus ring sits here at the mount side of the lens, but at the front side of the lens there is another distance scale, and that has only 3 areas. So from 2 meter to infinity, then from 0.9 meter to 2 meter, and then from 0.5 meter to 0.9 meter. And that is controlling a sophisticated element in the optical construction of the lens, which is called a floating lens element, or in short FLE. And this scale here in the 3 areas, which you can set up here at the front side of the lens, needs to be in sync with what you focus on with the focus ring here, or the main focus ring at the mount side of the lens. In the middle of the lens we have an aperture ring, and that works in half stops, and it has the nice clicks. Just listen. Very nice. Widest open is an f4, and you can stop this down in half steps all the way to f22. So let's bring this back to, let's say, f5.6, and then here we have shutter speed, and 1/500 seconds is where it starts here in terms of the most speedy one, and then we can go here up to 1 second. Then we have bulb mode, and then we have a green F here and a switch. I cannot go into F without pushing that button, but if I push it, I can actually choose here the green F, and F stands for focal plane shutter. And these lenses here, they have a leaf shutter, but they can also shut on camera bodies which have a focal plane shutter. And that is the setting I will use later when I mount my digital back, and then with the digital back shoot with the electronic shutter, because then by means of an electronic shutter I do not use the leaf shutter in the lens, but use the shutter in the digital back. And then F is the right setting. It's marked in green. I also cannot accidentally switch out here. I have to push the green button again, and then it takes me out of the focal plane shutter mode, for which this lens is also compatible. The last 2 elements on the lens are here. That is a PC sync port for flash photography, And here you have a depth of field preview switch, and I'm going to explain this in a moment very briefly. On this side of the lens, there is something interesting going on because these are EVs or exposure values. And I show quickly how this works. Let's say we want to shoot at an aperture of f5.6 and 1/250 seconds. I can independently here choose shutter speed and aperture, of course, in the way I just demonstrated. But I can also lock the combination and keep the same EV value, which is here for information only, in amber color. You see that currently this combination of, what did we choose, f5.6 and 1/250 seconds leads to an EV value of 13. And now if I push that button, it actually couples and binds together the aperture ring and the shutter speed ring. And if I say I like the EV value of 13, but I actually want to have a wider open aperture, I just push that button here and then it turns the full combination. You see, this is locked now. It turns simultaneously my aperture ring and my shutter speed ring. And I'm now at f4 with 500, but the EV value is still 13. So we kept the EV constant, but we have now a more shallow depth of field based on switching from f5.6 to wider open f4. Let's quickly look at that depth of field preview switch here, because that's an interesting one. So first of all, let's cock the lens and let's wind the camera body so everything is in ready to be shut mode. And now let's remove here the lens cap and let's have a look into the lens. The depth of field switch here can be pushed down and locked, and it can also be unlocked in that way here. So now it's unlocked, locked, unlocked. And if I now lock it, I can actually, when I turn my aperture wheel, which is here, I can see how the lens is stopping down, and that's something I want to quickly show. I hope you can see this, but I'm now widest open, and if I now start to stop down, you see how the aperture is closing. I think that's quite nicely to be seen here, and that's my depth of field preview button. And of course then, before I shoot, I have to unlock this again and bring it back to the normal state. And what happens if I do that is the following. Now it's open again and I'm ready to shoot. There are two ways of optical viewfinding on this type of cameras. Clearly, when I use my digital back, I have the live view here on the LCD, which I can use, and I show this when we are out in the field. But there is also a waist level viewfinder here, which I can easily open, and then we get a nice view inside the camera, and via the mirrors we see what's in front of the camera in the scene. I do not get the reflections out of my video filming here, but you will see it later again in the live shooting when we are in the field. This is now a view from top in the waist level viewfinder, and the image is actually very clear, in particular in bright sunlight. This is much better than shooting with an LCD. It's much better, and it's optical, of course. It uses the mirror, and you have a very clear representation of what's going on in front of you in the scene. And here you can now use the distance scale on the focus ring to get this sharp and in focus. Inside the waist level viewfinder, you have a switch which activates a magnification glass popping up. Let's have a look. You see? And now you get a significant magnification of the scene in front of you. That magnification helps a lot for even more precise focusing. And again, I'm going to show this when we are live in the field for shooting. So let's get this back. The magnification glass can just be pushed down. The waist level viewfinder can be closed. And then we have an alternative, of course. So we can remove the back, and then we can also remove the waist level viewfinder. Beautiful, by the way. Nice part and component here. By the way, I used here a framing sticker, which is shipped with the digital back here, the CFV 52C, in order to get my framing right. And you can just put this on top of the glass here. And that helps you to get your framing in a good way organized. So the alternative viewfinder to the waist level viewfinder is a Prism viewfinder. And this can just in the same way be slided on the camera body here. Let's get this right. So here we go. It snaps in. We can reinstall the film back here. And then we are good to go. And now you have a Prism viewfinder here, optical viewfinder just on top of it. And I think that combination works sometimes even better than the waist level viewfinder, for which these Hasselblad cameras are so famous of. Actually, I just realized I told you guys more about that camera and lens than I intended to do, because I'm so excited. I just love this type of photography. What I want to do now is I want to show how to replace the film back by the digital back and how nicely this is fitting. So first of all, we need to get the dark slide here on the front side. Otherwise, we cannot remove it. I showed this before. And then we take the digital back here from Hasselblad. And as I said, it's the CFV 50c, and we can just mount this here. By the way, here's the sensor. Beautiful. It's a crop medium format sensor, and always push that button when you lock it on. Never just push it on it without moving that button, because it can break the mechanics in the digital back as well as on the film back, of course. And now this is all of a sudden a hybrid. So we have now a fully analog camera body and lens, no electronic parts incorporated, and we have a super sophisticated high resolution 50 megapixel digital back married and mounted to that analog combination. And that, I think, is a beautiful value proposition. It looks nice. It's a pleasure to shoot it. We are going out in the field in a moment. I'm going to show how to shoot it. And then we also look into the images. And I really love that combination. It is a totally different feeling if you have that digital back on this type of analog camera mounted, or if you just have a digital camera in your hand. For landscape photography, I wanted to focus at infinity, so I got the FLE element in the right section. I first wanted to shoot with the leaf shutter in the lens, so I had to push the green button and get out of the focal plane shutter mode. It was a bright day, so I decided for a shutter speed of 1/500 seconds. I also decided for an aperture of f8 for landscape, and I set the focus ring to infinity. Next, I turned my attention to the camera body, and for the camera body you have various settings here. We'll use electronic shutter later, but here I went for the 503 camera body with winder. I could also have used the general 500 camera body setting here. With these settings, the camera is actually ready to shoot with the leaf shutter. What I overlooked was the ISO of 800, which was too high. Going into the preview of the digital back, I checked the image for sharpness, but also saw immediately, as indicated before with an ISO of 800, that the image is way off too bright. So I can correct here my ISO and go to the lowest setting, which is an ISO of 100. After this correction, shooting again with the leaf shutter will then reveal that the image is now correctly exposed, and I can also check this here in the preview, of course. Next, I wanted to go for electronic shutter. So you go back into the camera body menu, and then I changed this from 503 to any electronic shutter. If we leave then the camera body menu, we see that we now have a floating red electronic shutter button on the digital back. Since now we use electronic shutter and no longer the leaf shutter in the lens, we have to get into the focal plane shutter setting here. So I have to push that little green button and turn the ring into the F setting. On the lens, then I control only aperture, focus and FLE setting. I then wind the camera here, and on the right hand side there is a little lever which I can use for a mirror up function. You just heard the sound. And then I get all of a sudden the live view visible on my digital back and can control parameters like ISO and shutter speed. I can also control, of course, all other settings here, for instance in drive mode. So going here for a self timer, and then if I release the electronic shutter button, the self timer is perfectly working. And based on the settings I've chosen on my digital back, I get then the preview of the image and can look at it, check sharpness, and in general see if my parameter setting was correct. In the same way as the self timer, of course, on the drive mode, exposure bracketing is also perfectly working in that setup. I just have to make sure that my mirror is up, and then I have basically a setup where I have my live view and my electronic shutter and control ISO and shutter speed on the digital back. And you see here the process of taking 5 frames for an HDR image, which I later composed then in Lightroom, and we'll look into sample images anyway in a moment. But before we do that, I want to show 2 clips which I recorded in another location, showing how the Waist-Level Viewfinder works. Under bright sunlight, as I had it on this day, it is much more convenient to work with the Waist-Level Viewfinder instead of an LCD if you want to check focus, in particular if you use the magnifier built-in. Let's now look into a few sample images, and I want to start with this one here where you see in the metadata Hasselblad CFV II 50c, and then here's reference to the camera body 503 plus winder, and the rest is unknown because there is of course no communication between the camera body and the digital back here. And it's an ISO 100 image, and I think the image effect coming from this combination of an analog camera with a digital back is just so much more impressive than what you get with a plain vanilla digital camera. And you might agree or disagree. I don't really care because that's my opinion. And if you look into what the camera digital back combo here was delivering, it's pinpoint sharp. This is really an impressive image, I think. If you look at the structure and the details, even in the corners, let's just go here to the right hand side, very sharp, absolutely no distortion. Here on the left hand side, really sharp, really good. And I think I'm really convinced that this is a combination I will use going forward much more often than I did in the past. Here the same scene, but taken with a different approach. If we look into the metadata here, this is now not taken with the leaf shutter in the lens, but with the electronic shutter, plus unknown again for the same reasons as what I said before. And if you look at that image, this is a true medium format look. And if you have done photography for a while, you can distinguish a medium format look from a full frame look. And that's what you actually see here. Again, it's an image sharp corner to corner. It looks really good. And this image here actually came out of composing 5 frames from the exposure bracketing where I showed that little clip before. And the reason is that going for an HDR type approach in the Swiss mountains on these type of days sometimes is a good idea because the air, as you can see here, is always a bit hazy based on the various lakes we have surrounding these mountains. And in general, I like this image a lot. I think I will go now to 2 more images which I have taken at the lake, and then we conclude the video. Here now an image which has been taken at the lake where I showed you the clip about the Waist-Level Viewfinder. And again, is a typical medium format look you have in this image. A very strong image effect if you look at it. Super sharp, super clean, super crisp, and also a little bit less hazy weather at this location than what we had in the mountains in Canton Schwyz. I recorded in one clip my shooting at the lake, and what you hear in the background in terms of noise is actually the noise from a helicopter, and we will see that in a moment in one of the frames. And here is that frame, and why I'm showing this is because I want to show the level of detail which comes with these images in this hybrid camera setup I have here used for shooting the lake. And if we zoom in here into that image, by 100% we see here a tiny little thing going on in the air. If I go to 200%, you actually recognize that this is the helicopter which I was referring to before when we spoke about noise in the shooting scene. And clearly that is incredible detail which this lens is capturing in combination with the 50 megapixel sensor in that Hasselblad digital back. Here's the last frame I wanted to quickly show. That's looking in the other direction, not towards the mountains, but towards the other side of the lake. And again, it's a typical medium format look what you see here. And again, also you have incredible detail in these images on these little boats. I hope you liked that video and find shooting digital on analog as fascinating as I find it. And clearly that is something which I wanted to look into and show on my channel for a long time. Finally it happened. I have a few of these Hasselblad bodies. On all of them my digital back here is fitting and matching the camera body, so you can also go for different combinations here, of course. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me your thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.